Hi,
Lots
my
of
name is Simon Locke. I'm a board member of the Foreign Press Association. I am delighted today to be with Rebecca Fannin. Rebecca is a member of the FPA, but the reason why you're here today is because you are probably one of the preeminent experts when it comes to China and technology, right? You have spoken with many of the uh, billionaire leaders of China's tech companies, the largest companies, and watched them over an extended period of time. Not sure
Mhm.
there are many more people who have better insights into how that technology has developed over time. How did you get involved in looking at the China technology sector?
Okay. Well, I was in New York writing and editing for magazines, and I got the call from Red Herring magazine out on the West Coast in Silicon Valley, and I became their international news editor, which meant that I was also covering Asia. And covering Asia meant that I followed the money from Silicon Valley to China when it was the first entrepreneurial boom was starting in the technology world up for China. And the timing was just excellent. I got to interview the leading companies that were startups back then, and now they're tech titans. And I interviewed the venture capitalist who invested in them from Silicon Valley. And yeah, I basically, as a journalist, following the story, and I was ahead of the story, really. I was way ahead because nobody believed that story. And particularly in Silicon Valley, they were very skeptical that China could copy or innovate or do anything in technology. But it's been proven that, yeah, I was on the right track. And so I'm happy about that.
Well, so I know you also, you are in addition to being a journalist, you're an entrepreneur. You wear multiple hats, and many of those also overlap with the China story. So your new book, The New Tech Titans of China, is a kind of an update on the 2019 book, The Tech Titans of China. So I think the book's coming out on what, February 24th in the US, and it's going to be May out globally. What led you to the process of going? And it may kind of feel obvious, but you've written the Tech Titans of China. Why now the new ones?
The new ones, yes. Well, so much has changed in 5 or 6 years. It's a totally new book. And it had to be written because really nobody had updated what had happened to these Silicon Dragon companies that became tech titans, and then what happened to them after COVID, after all the pressure by the Chinese government on how big these tech titans became. So it really today is about innovation under pressure in China. 6 years ago, it was all full speed ahead, unstoppable. China was at the same level of venture capital spending as the Silicon Valley was. The patents, everything up on the upswing, and then the Chinese government got involved, and basically the U.S. venture capitalists all split, except for a few diehards who remain. But things are very tough now in that market. And so it had to be written because nobody else had done it, and there were huge changes.
Well, I remember actually walking on the streets of Beijing in 2008, just before the Olympics. And I
Yeah.
remember at the time walking around and going, "Oh, there are lots of electric bicycles," and I had very little sense, and I think probably few people had much sense that the sort of the sense of China as a follower, as a fast adopter of new technologies would necessarily become in such a short period of time really a globally dominant force in some sectors. Is
Mhm.
what's your sense of how, what's the story behind that evolution of
Mhm.
the tech sector, you know, and how it's got to where it is today?
Yeah, well, I think the U.S. underestimated China's ability to take, copying something to micro innovating to innovating on its own right. And that's what's happening today in many sectors. In drones, China leads in drones. In robotics, China is gaining by leaps and bounds in robotics. In batteries, China is the world leader. In energy, China is the world leader. You just go down the path, and in just about every sector, China is either gaining or is already a leader in many of these important technology sectors. I would say in AI, Silicon Valley is the leader and the US is the leader, but China is also catching up in that. As China has its own Anthropics, its own, Claudes, its own Geminis, and these are coming from the major companies, tech companies in China, Baidu, Alibaba, Tencent, ByteDance. They all are investing multi-billion dollars or more into new AI. They all have their own large language models. They have their own feeds into different business sectors, just like we see in the US. So this is a story that has evolved exceedingly rapidly over the last 15 years. Nobody could believe that China is where it is today. It's become a threat to the US in terms of superpower status. In the technology world, we're pushing back. The US is pushing back, like with China. We don't allow China electric vehicles. We're not allowing them in the United States. It's a competitive threat. Of course, it's couched as a privacy threat because of the connected cars, but it's definitely a competitive threat. That China is the world leader in electric vehicles by far, by far. If we allow Chinese EVs into this market, it's going to kill Detroit.
I was reading actually that I think there are still somewhere between 100 and 200 Chinese car manufacturers. The state in China has obviously been very involved in championing technology.
Yeah,
And in
that's
some
true.
cases, on the West Coast, you'd go, I think the technology mantra would be, leave government out of it because
Yeah,
that's going to crush our ability to innovate. And yet
right.
in China, that clearly has not been. There are examples, I think, in the book when there are problems and there are some failures, but there are
Yeah.
also clearly tremendous success. So what's your take on, you know, the maybe industrial planning, perspective in China and how that has actually played a role in helping China become such a leader in the technology?
Yeah, it's very interesting in that China is behind what's called industrial tech. This is semiconductors, robotics, the hardcore technology, the building bones, the infrastructure. China government is behind that in a big way. This is a huge change from the dot-com era, the internet era, the mobile internet era of China, where there was a lot of money made from those sectors. But now it's become a new story, new types of entrepreneurs, new types of industries, all being pushed by the Chinese government to further its ambitions for world domination in technology.
Uh, There's no doubt in the some of the stories of the Titans are mixed, right?
Yeah,
This has not been plain sailing for the Titans. How has
no.
it worked out in terms of, you know, you've talked to many of them. What do you take away from their stories?
Well, another part of the under pressure story is the pushback, the pressure by the Chinese government on these very powerful tech titans that all of a sudden became, well, over a decade, became extremely powerful and monopolistic, and they were going global, they were going public, they were getting into new sectors without approvals. So we had companies like Alibaba that was targeted. And then Alibaba was going to take public its fintech affiliate in the US. That was crushed. Didi, the Uber of China, was already public in the U.S. It was forced to delist from the U.S. Jack Ma was scolded and went underground, went under the radar for about a year. There were other outspoken tech founders who also felt the pressure. So it was an interesting time. Now I think it's eased up a bit because maybe the Chinese government has realized that they overdid it. Because you have companies that came along like DeepSeek and AI. The very inventive, very efficient AI model, DeepSeek. And it really shocked Silicon Valley about how effective it was and how it cost a lot less to produce than our models in the US. So all of a sudden, China began to ease up on that pressure on its tech titans. And by the way, the tech titans lost a lot of market value as a result. They had to downscale. They lost a lot of market value financially. They were really strained. And then January last year, President Xi called a meeting of its top entrepreneurs, and DeepSeek was in the front row, along with Jack Ma and Tony Ma of Tencent and others. And it signaled that they were going to allow for this more entrepreneurial spirit to prevail, which was really a large degree responsible for this huge tech boom in China. Just the entrepreneurial spirit of the Chinese people and the money and the talent and the capital, just all mixed together, and the momentum was really incredible. I was there during a large part of that and swimming in it, and it was great fun. Um, I also saw the same thing during Silicon Valley's dot-com boom, and also the bust as well, when the money went to China instead of Silicon Valley, because Silicon Valley was dead after the dot-com boom and bust. And the venture capitalists were looking for something new to invest in, and that's when they started going to China. And they became very comfortable with China, and they raised huge funds for China. And basically, they capitalized these Chinese tech titans. So anyhow, it's been a roller coaster story, continuing to this day. Um, with
Well, so
Yeah,
since you're touching upon capital, the um, I think it'd be kind of interesting to get your perspective on, where is the discussion? Where is capital flowing? Is capital stopped? And what are the implications of, you know, over the last few years, we know capital has slowed down to China. We know there are big red flags being kind of waved in Washington about what
yeah,
companies should be doing.
yeah.
What does that really mean? What does that mean for China's technology sector? And maybe what does it mean also for the US technology sector?
Well, these Chinese companies are not entering the US markets like they were. And the R&D that was very collaborative with between China and US is not happening anymore. A lot of the mergers and acquisitions that were happening are not happening anymore. Most of the venture capital from the US to China has dried up. Most of the Chinese tech investment into the US has dried up. And this has happened in the past 6 years approximately. And that's the government has stepped in to fill a void in China. And about 2/3 of the funding in China for tech startups and for tech innovation comes from the government now. 2/3, more than 2/3 is what I'm hearing now. So yeah, but it's interesting. The US government has gotten involved in technology too, with pushing semiconductors as a response to what China has done. We are also are recognizing that the US needs to respond in many of these sectors, particularly semiconductors.
Well, it wasn't that long ago that everyone's like beating up on the French for a dirigiste economy, right? And we're actually seeing, if China's at one end, it does seem like as though in the US that we are playing champions or there is investment being made. Do you think long term are there are the consequences good or bad for this, based upon, your conversations with people in Silicon Valley and in China? Is a sentiment, the government should be out, or basically, yeah, we need the governments in because this stuff is so important?
Yeah, I think Washington, D.C. would say we need the government involved, and certainly they have gotten more involved in a lot of restrictions on China technology. But in the long run, I think your question is about the long run. I think it's a negative. I think it's better if both sides can collaborate on new innovations because each side has its own strengths and each side has its own weaknesses. And I think that was playing out for about 15 years, starting around 2000. Um, and now we don't have that. And I worry that um, advancements in solar energy, in electric vehicles, and in many sectors is going to decline in the U.S. and we're going to lose our leadership, and that's going to cause new standards to develop for technology. The worry is that the leader sets the standards. So if China sets the standards, does that mean everyone in the world follows China's standards? Like for batteries, for instance, if we have all kinds of different batteries out there, can you imagine how confusing that could be? We already have different plugs, right?
Yep.
Every country you go to has a different plug, right? But if we have all these different, and there's all this battery innovation going on in both markets. So batteries, are the guts of all these electronic devices. So batteries are really important. It sounds kind of boring, but it's really important
Yeah.
that whoever has that leadership in batteries. But China has the leadership in batteries. They have a company called CATL, which has more than half of the market globally. One company. This is not out of the ordinary. This is happening in the drone business. There's one company from China that has a dominant share of the market globally. We're fighting everywhere you look. China, I mean, we're fighting. U.S. is fighting to maintain our market shares. But we've given up on a lot of industries. We've given up on too many industries.
I think it calls to mind. I think at the end of the book, you make a note that when it comes to leadership, it is clear that it's not necessarily, the US is winning out in terms of leadership in these key technology sectors. Are there places? I think you said earlier, AI may be a place where the US has
Hmm.
leadership in the core technology, but
Hmm.
then there's implementation, then there's how these
Yeah.
things put in place, right?
Well, that's true. That's true. And China has advanced rapidly in commercializing AI, getting it into facial recognition, into industries for predictions, for forecasting. So it's used in business and consumer world. I would say, well, certainly facial recognition is more prominent in China than it is in the U.S. We have we in the U.S. we have our data privacy concerns and our privacy concerns, which are more uh, apparent in the U.S. than they are in China. The privacy issues.
I assume that must be a significant, in a way, when the government is actually intrinsically involved. There are certain type of projects which are more likely to be funded, and
Yeah.
there are going to be consequences in terms of this, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, I think so. And that goes back to the comment about the hard tech or core tech that's being funded in China, because that's all about its national ambitions to be a world leader. It's not these silly little .com things that, or social media. It's not that anymore. It's real basic technologies that feed industries. It's not the consumer tech anymore, which actually was. very successful in China. So you have, the equivalents of Twitter, Google, Facebook, and every other social media in China, and partly because China prevented the US companies from getting involved, just like we're preventing the Chinese companies
Yeah.
from getting involved. China prevented the US companies from getting involved. So Facebook never succeeded in China. Google never succeeded in China. Twitter never did. Uber was actually outmaneuvered by a Chinese competitor. So the story of American technology in China, at least in some of these areas, has not been that great. But we'll see. I mean, it's interesting to watch where this China going global story is going to go. Because I think as we push back China, then now they're looking to other markets like in Southeast Asia and India and what they call the global South.
Right.
Yeah, the global South, right? So China loves that term. Um, and uh, and that's pushing Canada to, China to new markets. And I'm thinking Canada. Um, yeah,
Yeah, it's clear, right? There are consequences in terms of it does seem that China is actually kind of winning out to some extent on the global stage of the geopolitical shifts that are taking
yeah,
place. One thing that stood out to me as I was
yeah,
uh, reading about the topic, and I think there are a couple of things both related to the same topic, robotics. Is a lot of people asking the question, has China won? Has the US lost in robotics? And I wonder if it really should be framed in such a binary way. But
mm,
as a data point, I was reading that China implemented somewhere in the region of 300,000 uh, robots. I
mhm.
can't remember if it was over the last year compared to like 35,000 in the US. So there's sort of a 10 to 1 implementation rate of robotics in China compared to
Yeah.
the US. Do you think, people should the question be framed as, winners and losers, or how do you think we should be looking at these types of questions?
Well, I agree with you. It's not necessarily just a winner or loser situation, but I do think that China is ahead of the US in applying robotics, not just in factories where they're really prominent in the factories doing work that was done by factory workers, humans, and now turned over to robots. And so China has leapt gotten ahead there in a big way because there's so many factories in China. It makes sense. And I think also in the service industry, China, I hear from a lot of people I know who have lived in China or go back regularly how they have robots in their homes to help clean. To assist in various tasks. And we haven't gotten there yet in the US. Maybe we don't want to go there. But yeah, robots are much more of a part of the everyday life in China. They're used for food delivery. You see them delivering food at lunchtime to the workers, in major urban cities such as Shanghai. And I mean, how have you seen a robot delivery
The
machine?
closest I got was I was in Japan last year, and for the first time I was in a restaurant, and there was a robotic delivery
Yeah,
waiter, waitress. You know, well, I don't know we shouldn't be gendering robots, right?
yeah, right.
So- but it was interesting. It was, and I know that from a Japan perspective, uh, you see things like Roombas were adopted probably fairly early on.
Yeah.
I wonder if one of the important components, and this will really kind of like take into my last framing of the question here, which is, what do you think, when we're considering all of this stuff,
Mhm.
that maybe we're missing? What are the types of maybe underlying trends, things that are driving the changes that maybe we don't necessarily notice? Is it a lower birth rate means that actually, you're struggling in terms of people. So you actually are more likely to be looking at things like as robotics as solutions. Is it,
Hmm.
what are the things that you've seen that you go, people are not really thinking about this, but it's actually kind of important they do because that helps understand what's happening.
Well, there is a bit of a reverse brain drain right now of engineers going back to China, where it was the other way to come here to get education at the best schools, MIT and Stanford and Berkeley, and then go back to China, but stay in the US for several years or most of their career. But now we're seeing engineers saying the opportunities are better in China. And so they are moving there. Talent is moving. Lead scientific talent is moving back because they could get more research funding there. It's a more lucrative area now than maybe the US, where we are cutting R&D spending. Um, and I think the talent flow is an important part of this, and the educational flows too. The schools in China, from what I hear, have gotten a lot better. And so you see many of these Chinese schools among the top ranked universities in the world today. So I would say follow the education trends and the talent trends to see where things will go next. But one thing that another aspect of this story is that how many of the Chinese um, business executives are engineers by training. So China has a very strong engineering, has really strong engineering roots, and that has helped them to get into these new technology areas. So the US doesn't necessarily have such that have that strength, but China has it. Engineering, yeah, engineering is it. Yeah.
Well, I remember again when I was living in Asia, one of the things that we were talking about, this is more than 20 years ago, is that the China's economy needed to shift from necessarily being completely export oriented to
Hmm.
developing its internal market. And
Yeah.
I'm assuming in clearly China is the dominant global exporter, right? But that internal market must have
Yeah.
dramatically changed over the
Yeah.
times you've been going there.
Yeah.
Is that the right way to also see a fundamental shift going on there?
Well, I think so. There's a term that's been repeated quite often now in China called laying flat. So laying flat means you're not getting any work. There's no work to be had. You might as well lay flat and wait it out. And it's a very um, depressed and downward trend happening in China today, where people are just sitting it out. And the economy is not, is not the boom years it was a decade ago. So there are huge demographic changes and unemployment changes and a pullback of international companies from China as well. So I think this laying flat aspect, I don't know how much longer they can lay flat, but maybe until after Chinese New Year.
Sure.
But
Well, long term, and this will be a great place to wrap up. Are you optimistic in the sense that the US and China will find the balance and the technology industries in both in Silicon Valley and in China can continue to
yeah.
pursue positive paths?
Well, I think having frequent travels back and forth, where I am seeing people going back and forth now. They weren't here in Silicon Valley. They were not going to China for a couple years. Now they're going again. And I think that's a good sign. I think on both sides it's happening. So I think when people understand one another better, that can lead to more collaboration. So I'm optimistic that we'll see more collaboration again, maybe not to the extent that we had, because we do view China now as a threat, and not necessarily an ally in technology. But that can change, and I think it probably needs to, for the good of the world economy in terms of where the innovation is going.
Rebecca, thanks very much indeed. Your new book, The New Tech Titans of China, coming out. Glad you got your copy. We'll post one up in the video, and we'll create a link to it.
Okay,
Um,
thank you.
for great, it was a great read, and
Oh,
provided a
thanks.
lot of perspective in terms of what's going on. And this is clearly one of the world's most important economic and sort of social issues, that the relationship between the US and China, and the role of technology is a must read. So
Oh,
thanks for writing it.
thanks for reading it, Simon. I appreciate that, and I appreciate the positive remarks. And I do agree with you. It's a very important story to follow, so I'm still following it.
Excellent. Well, look forward to the next one.
Okay.
Thanks very much indeed.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Simon. Okay, bye-bye.